Hello, so in lesson 1 we discussed literary elements, so in lesson 2 we will be moving on to literary devices. Literary devices. Here we go. And I've got my bunch of note cards, flashcards here for that as well. So the literary devices are the tools that the author uses. So in lesson 1 we discussed the literary elements, or what a story is made up of. Literary devices are the tools that the author uses. So this includes figurative language, which includes simile, metaphor, imagery, personification, hyperbole, symbolism, and idiom, and sound devices, which includes alliteration, onomatopoeia, which is one of my favorite words, and assonance. It also includes conceptual devices, sentence-level devices, and narrative devices. So conceptual devices would also include irony is the main one that you will talk about. So let's start off with figurative language. Figurative language, again, includes simile, metaphor, imagery, personification, hyperbole, symbolism, and idiom. And then I'm just going to read off what each one is. And again, here we go. So simile is comparing two things using like or as. So it would be when you say something like, you're as beautiful as the sun. It's something along those lines. You compare two unlike things using like or as. Metaphor, on the other hand, is when you say that one thing is the other thing. So instead of saying, you're like the sun, you say you are the sun. That's the difference between simile and metaphor. It's something you should discuss in elementary school. It comes up again middle school through high school. Imagery is descriptive or figurative language. Sorry if I'm not showing these cards. They didn't show up very well last video, so I wasn't sure if that's helpful or not. Imagery is descriptive or figurative language that evokes the senses. So descriptive or figurative language that evokes the senses. Personification. A thing or idea is given human traits or feelings or talked about as if it were a person. So good examples of personification in history that comes up a lot, where like the founders of America were always talking about, like, oh, liberty is a lady and she's holding her torch and marching and blah blah blah. That's personification. You're saying this thing that's an idea, or that's an object or concept or whatever, is a person, a human person, and you're giving it actions and words. You're personifying it. Hyperbole, spelled kind of like hyperbole, is greatly exaggerated for effect, not meant to be taken literally. So when you say, like, that bird's as big as a house, I could eat a horse, I did such and such for 1,000,000 times, that's hyperbole. You're being hyperbolic. Symbolism, the use of symbols when something stands in for something else. That's symbolism. It's pretty easy. And idiom, a saying or expression. Example, raining cats and dogs. So common sayings, things that people say all the time. So now we'll move on to these sound devices. Those were the figurative language examples. We're now going to get into sound devices. Alliteration. Alliteration is repetition of consonant sounds at the start of words. Example, tongue twisters. So there's consonants and vowels. We should know the difference between what those are. So it's when there's sounds at the start of a word that's the constant sounding, and you repeat it again. And it gives the example of tongue twisters. I think there's probably better examples than that, but that's something we can all think of and know what it is. Like Sally sells seashells down by the seashore. That's alliteration. Onomatopoeia, one of my favorite words there, is words for sounds. So it'd be like buzz, swish, fizz, pop. Those are some examples of onomatopoeia. It's when you have the word is the sound effect. And then on the subject of irony, I will go into more on this in a later video. There's 3 major types of irony: verbal, situational, and dramatic. Now, narrative devices are the overlap between literary elements and literary devices because they also fall under plot structure. So narrative devices. Examples of narrative devices include flashback, foreshadowing, and in medias res, which is another one of my favorite phrases there. We'll get there in just a second. So flashback is when an event from the past is remembered or returned to during the present action. That's a flashback. We should all be pretty familiar with those from TV and movies. Foreshadowing, we can get these cards to separate here, is a hint is given as to what's going to happen next in the story or later in the story. So foreshadowing is there's lots of examples out there, but the very in-your-face one is that old-timey way where they would have like prophecies or foretellings where someone says like, terrible thing is going to happen to the character, and then it happens. That's kind of outdated now. That's very, all the way through mythology to Shakespeare type times. But it's still something happens in the story that lets you know, hey, something good or bad, usually, something extreme is going to happen later on related to whatever that thing is. Kind of like, almost like a domino effect. And then in medias res, sorry you cannot read that there, I-N space M-E-D-I-A-S space R-E-S. So you usually see this in italics because it's a Latin phrase, and when you have words or phrases that are in other languages, you're supposed to put them in italics. It translates as in the midst of things, midst, M-I-D-S-T, and it simply means starting the story in the middle of the action. So anytime you read a story and things are already going on and you join in the middle of, like, there's a battle going on or people are running or there's something, something exciting and active is happening, and you're just kind of joining right there in the middle of things. That's what in medias res is. So those are the major literary devices that get covered in English language arts grades 6 through 12.